Hello, welcome to another episode. Today we have Elijah Magnier with us. Thank you so much for being here with us today. Elijah is a veteran war zone correspondent. He's a political analyst with over 35 years of experience covering the Middle East and North Africa. He specializes in real-time reporting of politics, strategic and military planning, terrorism, and counterterrorism. Welcome, Elijah. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be with you.
Thank you. So I wanted to jump right in to the first question here. Obviously, on Friday, we had the Hezbollah leader, Nasrallah, hold his speech. He addressed his followers on the conflict right now unfolding in Palestine, Israel. And of course, a lot of people had expected him to reveal the next move, which he didn't. He did condemn the attacks. He asserted that the operation was, in fact, independent of Iran. He blamed the US for the war in Gaza, and he confirmed that Hezbollah had, in fact, been engaged since October 8th, not October 7th. And then finally, he called on other countries or Arab countries to cut off oil and gas and so on. So I really wanted to hear, kind of based on that speech, what impact his statement had on all regional dynamics.
Well, you rightly said people raised their expectations because they really didn't understand what Hezbollah was doing from the 8th of October, because what has been done, and because rightly people don't follow what Hezbollah is doing, they don't understand the dynamic, they don't understand the behavior, the special language that Hezbollah used with the Israelis, etc. So on the 8th of October, what happened is something that never happened before. Hezbollah took the initiative of bombarding an Israeli position on the radar hill that is within the Lebanese occupied territory of the Shibah Farm and the Kfar Hills. This is why, because Hezbollah took the initiative and started to engage the Israelis along the 100 to the 120 kilometers borders, Hezbollah attracted a third of the Israeli army, which means that Hezbollah pulled to itself a third of the Israeli army that supposedly would have been engaged in Gaza, surrounding the entire strip and occupying already not only the city of Gaza, but the strip in the north and in the south. That's a major achievement. By doing so, it means Hezbollah is already in a war. What Hezbollah is not is to divert the attention from the Palestinian cause, is for people and for countries around the world to say this is a war between Iran and Israel, because when Hezbollah will start attacking Israel, there is no longer the Palestinian cause that has been considered as the forgotten cause since 1948, 1973, 1991, the Oslo Agreement, 1992, when the two states peace agreement was signed with the Americans, that dramatically failed in their diplomatic effort to establish two states for the Palestinians. Now, because of all that, and also because Hezbollah doesn't need to start attracting the war to Lebanon and start fighting with the Israelis without a real reason, because the reason now Hezbollah has is it's trying to defend its territory and is engaged in a battle along the occupied Lebanese territory, because there are so many differences between the Israelis and the Lebanese over the borders. There is a disputed border, there is a blue line, and there are United Nations there. When the Israelis started to bomb the fields and the beyond the 2 kilometers borders, then Hezbollah enlarged to 5 kilometers, and this is where the exchange happened. Now, the other point is most of the Arab population around the world, we're talking about 1.3 to 1.5 billion people, expect Lebanon with 1.5 million Shia or 2 million to start a war against Israel, and they're not asking their government first to stop normalizing with Israel, second to do something in support of the Palestinians. We're not talking here about Shia and Sunni. We're talking about you have the entire Arab population that is not lifting a finger apart from some countries like Kuwait, Qatar, Iraq, who are expressing solidarity and who are standing against Israel and fighting in their way by providing a good media coverage, by taking a stand against the Israelis like the Kuwaitis. However, nobody opened a fire against the Israelis. They don't have borders, although Egypt and Jordan have borders with Israel. And the only thing that Egypt did is said, I don't want them in the Sinai desert. You take them to the Negev and keep them there. He didn't say, as 120 million people with my army and my weight in the peace process, I open the Rafah border, that is the Egyptian border, and allow humanitarian support to go to Gaza. Nobody is asking from the Egyptian to send an army, but just to open the door for the humanitarian aid. So what Nasrallah said is he sent a direct threat to the Americans because from the day one, the Americans came, Joe Biden came to see Netanyahu and said, we sending carriers to the Middle East. So Hezbollah said, well, we have adequate weapons to the Americans if they get involved. And we remind you that we have already defeated you in 1982 by bombing the Marines, by bombing the American embassy. Stay where you are and don't interfere. Moreover, the Iraqi resistance is attacking the US bases in Syria and Iraq. And why the Iraqis? It's because every time there is an attack in Syria, the Americans go to the soft target and the weakest link, that is Damascus, and they attack the Syrian who do not want to engage in a battle. However, the Americans are afraid of engaging with the Americans because with the Iraqis, because the Iraqis have the capability to render the life very difficult to the Americans in Iraq, particularly when the Americans have several military bases. But what's happening is now that there is Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Jordan who are intercepting all the missiles and drones that are coming from Yemen and from Iraq on Israel in support of Gaza. And we not only have Arab countries that are not helping the Palestinian from the humanitarian side, but they are stopping the access of the resistance from contributing not to defeat Israel. This is not the way to defeat Israel, but to put pressure on the American and say, stop this war, achieve a ceasefire, open humanitarian corridor. So by saying that he only condemned or people expected a war, there is no war more than what is already happening between Lebanon and Israel.
Thank you so much. So yeah, maybe we can touch a little bit more on the allegations against the U.S. right in the context of this conflict. How do Nasrallah's allegations influence Hezbollah's relationship with the U.S.? And then I guess a two-part question there. The potential ramifications that maybe the appeal for other Arab nations to kind of enact these economic measures and cut off oil and gas and so on and so forth. What would that look like if that happens? I mean, what are the potential consequences or ramifications of that?
I'm going to be straightforward and honest with you, really. Most of the Arab countries are delighted to see the bones of Hamas completely broken. They're happy to see the Israelis defeating Hamas or really teaching a lesson to Hamas. Nevertheless, there is no lesson to be taught to Hamas because you have 2.3 million inhabitants in Gaza, and they not all called Hamas. Hamas is a Palestinian resistance group that operate along with other resistance groups for a valid reason and a valid cause they have, because Benjamin Netanyahu went to the United Nations just a few weeks ago, took a geographic plan of Israel, where the West Bank and Gaza don't exist. And he showed the world how the economic and line that go across from India to Saudi Arabia to Israel and going through Greece and Europe, that is going to supply the European with gas and oil and will be the alternative of the Chinese Silk Road. Secondly, when Netanyahu stood up and said the Oslo Agreement is finished, is dead, that means he's saying that all the American efforts are no longer taken into consideration. They haven't never been serious because no American responded to that. And Donald Trump already moved the embassy to Jerusalem and gave the Syrian occupied Golan Heights to the Israelis. So saying, okay, unlimited support to Israel, the Palestinian cause is forgotten. We have a few people in Gaza, we will find a solution for them. Already we are rendering their life miserable on a daily basis. And not only that, if we look at the West Bank, where there is a President Mahmoud Abbas that was elected in 2005 and doesn't want to move from his chair, he is one of the best Israeli and American partner. And yet, every single day, the Israelis break into the West Bank. They've killed around 120 to 150 Palestinians since the 7th of October, where Hamas doesn't have the control. They have arrested 1,500 Palestinians, and they can do whatever they want. No Palestinian had the right to construct on his own land, even in the West Bank. So this policy and the testimony of all the Israeli officers and officials they are telling us that first, they don't consider the Palestinians as human beings, but animals. Others went a bit further, saying, we don't want to offend the animals and consider the Palestinians as animals, with all due respect to the animals, because they are inferior to animals. So therefore, we can't talk about human rights because Palestinians are no longer considered humans and have been completely demonized. Also, when the Israeli officials speak clearly about ethnic cleansing, pushing the Palestinian outside Gaza, outside the West Bank, never agree on all the UN Security Council resolution, never allow the Palestinians to return to their land, even if it is supported by international law, including the United States and all its club and allies. Because of all that, the Palestinians have no longer anything to lose. As they are animals, according to the Israelis, then they have to come out and look how they can protect themselves in a survival mode. So now, for the first time in the history of Israel since 1973, the Palestinians take the initiative to attack the Israelis. And then suddenly we have an earthquake at the size of the whole world that is shaking, and Israel has the right to defend itself by killing as many Palestinians as possible, to the point that the number of casualties today are 37,000 between killed, wounded, and under the rubble. What the Israelis are doing now, they have encircled the north of Gaza. They're trying to allow only a small passage occasionally on specific hours for all the Palestinians in the north to flee toward the south. So they want to squeeze 2.3 million in one small area. Already Gaza is 41 kilometers long and 6 to 12 kilometers wide. And they want to squeeze them in a place where one single bomb can kill hundreds on every single bomb. So all the atrocity and the ethnic cleansing that leads to genocide, the cut of water, electricity, and all that, the Arabs are not moving. The Arabs are not capable of asking for a ceasefire. They don't want to use oil and gas as a weapon. They are afraid of the American reaction, but they also are more or less careless about the Palestinian cause. Well, what is linking the Arabs with the Palestinians is the language, really. They don't have border with Palestine. They have business with the Israelis. They don't want to hear about the Palestinian cause. And they say, well, it's finished. Let's do something about these people and then finish it. If Israel wants to finish it without embarrassing us, well, yes, why not? Now, that is the attitude of the Arabs, and it's not going to change.
Yeah, my God. I mean, today we had the Israeli minister, I need to look up his name, Amichai Eliyahu, right? That the genocidal language being used is just absolutely out of this world. They're telling the entire world, hey, we're just going to ethnically cleanse all of Palestine. And the world is just like, yeah, cool. It's absolutely ridiculous that we're seeing this. And a comment that you made, they tell them to flee, right? But then they bomb the areas where they're supposed to flee. We're definitely going to go a little bit more into the neighboring countries and kind of how their actions or lack of action impact the entire situation in a bit. I wanted to ask you a final question and I'll hand it over to Sarah. We know that obviously the conflict has evolved massively and Israel's military strategy is kind of shifting a little bit and changing now. And of course, with Hezbollah now, with their operations across the Lebanese-Israeli border, they've forced Israel to split their military focus essentially. So I just kind of wanted to ask about how Israel's current military strategy kind of looks like and how it has evolved now with this latest speech and everything that's going on in the region.
Well, there are different points that you raised. What the Minister Eliyahu said is really, this is not shocking. What is shocking is when he was on the interview on the radio and he said, it is possible to nuke Gaza. The problem is not that. The problem is the journalist who asked him, what about the 243 hostages? It is not about the 2.3 million Palestinians in Gaza that you can throw a nuclear bomb on the entire population, imitating what the Americans did in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. He was concerned about the 243 hostages. So he doubled down saying, well, yes, he needs to take into consideration the life of 243 Israeli. And he's right, because he considered the 2.3 Palestinians as animals. So he has no consideration for the animals even if here in Europe, we have a lot of consideration to the life of every being, including the animals. So it shows that the Palestinians have not even the level of consideration that the animals can enjoy. For that, the main concern is about only the Israeli prisoners and captives. Now, why he's saying that? First, he revealed for the first time, admitted that Israel has nuclear bombs. This has never been heard of, and Israel never admitted that. Secondly, he is showing the criminal mindset toward the Palestinians that exists in the mind of many Zionists. We don't talk about Jew here because the Jewish religion, most of the Jewish religion, stand against these acts. They are against their religion. There is no connection what Netanyahu is trying to make between the Jew and the behavior of the Zionists in Israel. Now, what the aim of Israel at the moment in Gaza? What they're trying to do is they have surrounded Gaza from different sides. If that is your question, isn't it? So
correct, yeah.
Yeah, so from the northwest along the coast, they pushed forces toward the Al-Shati camp. From the north, they pushed forces toward Beit Hanun and Jabalia, and from the middle, they pushed forces toward north of Wadi Gaza, the Gaza Valley, to cut and surround more or less 100 square kilometers of territory and allow a small passage for people while they control it under fire to go from the north to the south. Because, first of all, the number of casualties of the civilians is affecting the narrative worldwide. So they don't want to hear more civilians are killed, although they have total disregard to the life of civilians. Secondly, they're bombing hospitals. They want to evacuate the hospitals because people, during my work as a war correspondent in area where Israel has bombed in Lebanon or in Gaza, people go to hospitals for two reasons. First, because they think it is safer. Second, because they want to charge their phone and listen to the news because there is electricity that is in the hospital, and they can always make sure to know what's happening in the world. Otherwise, at their home, because Israel cut the electricity and water, it is an occupation forces, and it can do whatever it wants in Gaza, and it is in control of anything that goes in and out. Therefore, it is the inhabitants of Gaza are considered as occupiers. Therefore, they have the right to be in a resistance position. So this is why they go to hospitals and to make sure they know anyone of their relative, because every day Israel is killing between 200 and 400 people. So targeting the hospital and asking the hospital to be totally evacuated is forcing the majority of the population that is around the hospital to flee toward the south. And why they're doing that is they want less casualty when their soldiers are going to go in. The less casualty there are, the more visible the resistance is. They want also to put the burden on Hamas and the Islamic resistance and the Palestinian resistance in the south, because if the Palestinian resistance is left with 2.3 million people in a small area where there aren't houses to accommodate them, why the number of casualties very high is because the relative meet and sit in one place and they flee to the south, and you have between 30 to 80 people in one single flat. So because of that, they want to put this pressure on Hamas and say, okay, now you feed them, you look after them, you secure homes or shelter for these people, and you're not going to manage, then these people will turn against you. This is the objective of the Israelis, to ethnic cleanse the north, and then if the north is easy to fall, then they will turn toward the south. Because I've seen in other wars of Israel, when they push their tanks to a limited area and they see there's a possibility to go further, then they go further. So they take the opportunity. They are very fine military strategists. So if the north doesn't stand and doesn't hold, or the resistance in the north after the invasion doesn't make the life of the Israeli occupation forces difficult, then the Israelis can turn towards the south and create a serious exodus of all the Palestinians outside Gaza, which I doubt is not going to happen, because I don't think the resistance is not aware of the Israeli plan.
So I want to start exploring the regional relationships around Palestine. We keep talking about what's going on inside of Gaza, and that's important, but this is going to reverberate throughout the region. So I kind of wanted to touch on, we touched on it a little bit earlier, but Saudi was working on normalizing relations with Israel. And then when this started, they kind of said, no, we're going to stop that. And then they said, actually, we're not going to stop. And then they condemned Hamas. And why has there been a shift in Saudi Arabia's foreign policy kind of back and forth? And this lends us to think that maybe there are more covert interactions with Israel and what could be their underlying motivations of keeping this relationship okay. Not even that, they're shooting down missiles launched from Yemen and Iraq. Maybe who even really knows what's going on with that? And also from an outside perspective, as someone that lives in the West, I always look at Saudi Arabia with an expectation that they would be the stewards of Islam in a way, because they're the host of the holiest sites in Islam. But they don't really step into that leadership issue like Iran does. And why do you think that is with Saudi? Is it just a a money thing, or is there something else kind of going on?
The Saudi Arabia said they're not going to normalize with the Israelis now for several reasons. First of all, they don't want to give this normalization achievement and victory to a Democrat like Joe Biden, who considers Saudi Arabia as a pariah state. And they prefer, if Donald Trump is going to come to power, to give it to a Republican rather than a Democrat. Now, the war on Gaza came as a manna to the Saudis, and now they can say, well, because what you have done in Palestine against the Palestinians in Gaza, so we're not going to normalize because we can't afford selling this normalization to our people, which is not true, because at the end of the day, who controls Saudi Arabia is the monarchy, and Mohammed bin Salman can change the weather anytime he wants. Second point is Hamas is considered a terrorist organization by Saudi Arabia. People maybe don't remember that, but many Hamas officials were thrown in jail in Saudi Arabia. Third, the leadership of the Sunni world in the Middle East is over, is no longer in the hand of the Saudis. Turkey took a bit. Saudi Arabia maintained some interest in some area. The main interest was in Syria and Lebanon, really. And the Gulf countries respect the Saudis, and they can't say no to the Saudis for any issue, at the exception of Qatar, that was boycotted by the Saudis, and the Saudis imposed sanctions on Qatar for a few years until they understood that Qatar is surviving really without the Saudis. But there is something that unites the Gulf countries together and doesn't allow the strong split among them. So for the Saudis not to announce the normalization with Israel, but to receive two Israeli ministers just before the war on Gaza and continuous business relationship with the Israeli company, that is still ongoing. This has never stopped, even without announcing the normalization. Saudi Arabia today is no longer interested in leading the Arab state or the Sunni in the Middle East or in the world. They're no longer the leaders. We see Pakistan doesn't obey to the Saudis, or other countries, Algeria, Morocco, Tunisia, Libya, and in the Middle East, we see Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, even the Emirates. They clash with Saudis in Yemen, and they have conflict of interest in Yemen. So it's no longer the old position of Saudi Arabia, where Saudi used to pay a lot of money to all these countries around it and make sure that they maintain loyalty and area of influence. Today, the Saudis have lost a lot in the Arab world, and what's happening in Gaza is really the least of their concerns. This is why, if the Saudi wants, they can impose the ceasefire on the Americans and on the Israelis with no time. But this is not the will of the Saudis. They just walk like all the others and say, this is what we call for, but we don't want to impose. In the war on Yemen, Saudi Arabia used to call 3 to 5 times a meeting of the United Nations Security Council or the General Assembly. And for Gaza, they didn't call not even one.
Well, you brought up Yemen, so that's another thing that I want to explore, because we have the recent peace, we'll call it peace, negotiated by China between Iran and Saudi Arabia, for all intents and purposes, ended the war in Yemen, has obviously not ended the blockade, but and we work closely with Yemen, so we get regular updates from there. But what we do have is from, I kind of want to read this statement because I found it to be quite interesting. Nasrallah. People actually, I want to say that people are mistaking and saying Yemen has declared war. Yemen has not declared war on Israel. Nasrallah has declared war, or just a sustained attack. So Striking the Zionist entity made us feel warm and happy inside, and we were overjoyed when we heard U.S. aircraft carriers were coming. We asked Saudi Arabia, despite being our enemy, to let us through their borders to fight in Palestine, but they refused, even though we're very excited to fight. We put international criticism at our feet. We will make you accept world peace against your will. There is a prevailing logic in the world that says that the weak should submit to the strong and that the poor should follow the rich. The logic is rejected by us in Yemen because we are a people with dignity and pride. They took responsibility for those 3 attacks and had basically declared war with the Yemeni military, kind of saying we support it, but we're not declaring war. How does this change anything for Yemen? What I'm seeing now is a kind of a shift where Yemen is somewhere that we've worked with for about 2 years now, kind of a forgotten people, a forgotten place in terms of foreign policy. And now that I just asked you about Saudi, and we've agreed that Saudi is not the leader, can Yemen now emerge? Because Yemen has taken a hardline stance from the very beginning and is now saying we're going to continue to attack from the south, whether or not they let us. So what does this change? How does this influence regional cooperation or arguments or diplomacy, or can Yemen even enter into international diplomacy given the state that they're still in?
Well, the only thing that Yemen can do now is to launch missile and drones on Israel. And they resulted very effective during the war against Saudi Arabia. And we have seen what they have done with Aramco, how they fought the Saudis to a ceasefire, etc. Now, the problem is that Yemen is far from Gaza. And because Yemen is very far from Gaza, all its missiles and drones need to cross between 1,500 to 1,700 kilometers. The ballistic missiles need to go above the level of Earth and then go down, and it was extremely easy to be intercepted. The problem with Yemen is Yemen doesn't have the Iranian technology with the missile that can, to put it in a more simple terminology for those who do not know a lot about the military, so that their missiles cannot change the speed while they are in the air, and to avoid interception. This is why countries like Saudi Arabia and Egypt and the Americans, who reinstalled the Patriot missile and interception missile back in Saudi Arabia when they pulled them out when they were in disagreement with the Saudis and they wanted to teach them a lesson. Now they are back, and they are back only to serve Israel. And the Saudis accepted, because of one reason, one objective, is to defend Israel, to defend the airspace of Israel, and to prevent the Yemeni from bombing Israelis and gather more support for their cause. Can you imagine a missile landing in Israel, launched from Yemen? How the population in the Middle East will sympathize more with the Yemeni cause? They will no longer looked at as a small militia who needs to be destroyed, but at least a part in Yemen that support the Palestinian cause, where all their regimes like Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, the Emirates are not supporting the Palestinian cause and are leaving the Palestinians for their destiny. So the only people who are firing against the Israelis are from Lebanon, from Yemen, and from Iraq. I don't want to mention the Syrian border, because the Syrian border from the occupied Golan Heights is more or less the same group as the Lebanese and the Iraqis and the Syrian resistance. But that's a bit limited because it's much more complicated, and Russia plays a role, and the Russian-Israeli relationship plays a role, and the Damascus Authority doesn't want to start a war with the Israelis that is capable of reacting harshly now that it has the full support of the international community that closes an eye even on its war crime and crimes against humanity.
Well, you don't think that you're going to get away with not talking about Syria today, do you? You can't just, we're not going to not talk about Syria. We have to talk about Syria. But first, we'll talk about Jordan. So Jordan has one of the largest Palestinian populations in the world outside of Palestine. I think it might even be larger than the population in Gaza. But they have strong historical ties with Palestinians. The people there have been protesting, asking them to open the border. They've refused. The King of Jordan has done a couple photo shoots. Then they recalled their ambassador, but then they also offered to host U.S. military and air defense systems. What's kind of the story with Jordan? They seem to be the one in the region that has the strongest ties to the West, if I could say that.
Yes, you certainly may say that because, for example, Jordan during the war in Syria, along with Turkey, has established an operational room for the Americans and the Gulf countries to plan and support all the attempt to destabilize and create a failed state in Syria. So Jordan was the first to warn the Israelis about the 1973 war, and Jordan maintains an excellent relationship with Israel even before Egypt signed a peace deal with the Israelis. Now, yes, Jordan doesn't want the Palestinian exodus from the West Bank, and this is what the Israelis are trying to do. And ethnic cleansing, it means eliminated the presence of the Palestinians. This is what is the Israeli target at the end of the day, is to push out the Palestinian in the West Bank toward Jordan and the one in Gaza toward Egypt. And the Americans are trying to bribe the Egyptian and the Jordanian by saying, well, you have debt, we can cancel these debts, and you need financial support that we can step up and give you money if you need to. But let us try to sort out the question of Palestinian refugees or Palestinians who are kicked out. Now, why Egypt and Jordan refuse to have the Palestinians? For a simple reason. Which country can have 2.3 million Palestinians and then a population that is in support of the Palestinian cause? Because we need to keep in mind that it's a huge gap between an Egyptian and an Egyptian leader with no problem to have a relationship with Israel, and Egyptian population and Jordanian population who never digested the relationship with Israel because they are nationalistic, because they support the just Palestinian cause, because they understand these people have been deprived from their territory and they want it back, or at least to live with the Israeli in two states, as the Americans said, but they never applied. So in Jordan, if we have 2.3 million, there is a strong possibility, as in Egypt, to destabilize the regime. For that, nobody wants that. But they're not putting enough pressure on Israel, recalling the ambassador. So what? At the end of the war, and it's going to end in 1 week or 1 month or 2 months, well, maybe I'm exaggerating 2 months. The Israelis can't last for 2 months, for 2 more months. But once the war ends, then the ambassadors will return. So this symbolic act is not helping the 2.3 million people of Gaza to have back their water or electricity or medicine or fuel for the hospitals, all the bread they want to eat, all everything they need. Usually Gaza used to receive 500 trucks per day. Now they are receiving between 14, 17 and 20 per day. And these trucks, for your information, they cross Rafah, the Egyptian border. They go directly to the Erez border where the Israelis are. They empty the truck, they control it, and then they send it back with the United Nations employee, who have lost 70 so far, killed by the Israelis, and they are back and distributed to a small, tiny portion of population that are living with the United Nations employee in their schools, because schools the Palestinians consider these are the safest place, hospitals and schools, churches and mosques. Well, no, they all hit and they all have been destroyed, and the Israelis committed massacres in these places. So the Jordanian, I think they so far are exerting a very shy influence or policy. They trying to voice their support to the Palestinians, which is right, but they don't do more than that. The Palestinians don't need only voices. And if we talk about what the Jordanians are doing, what the Egyptians are doing, because these are the two countries with the border with the Palestinians, and then we go to the Lebanese and say why they are not waging war on Israel, and they have already lost 60 men with their war on the Israelis. So you see, just to mix up the first question and this question together.
All right, now we have to go to Turkey. So Turkey and Israel work together in Armenia to ethnically cleanse Artsakh, now known as Nagorno-Karabakh. But Erdogan has come out very strongly against Israel and condemning them, calling it a genocide repeatedly, refusing to condemn Hamas, and going as far as to not only promote, but then participate in a massive protest, which then Israel bombed the Turkish hospital in Gaza. But why do you think Erdogan is positioning himself like this? People keep saying, oh, he has an election coming up. He doesn't. He doesn't have an election coming up. I guess he could use popular support in a way, but is he only doing this because he can get away with this being a NATO member and kind of not like still being in the pocket? He also helps transport oil from Azerbaijan to Israel. So what is Erdogan's kind of end game here, or what are his intentions? Nobody ever knows, but I'm still going to ask you what Erdogan's intentions kind of are.
Well, if you look at the beginning of the second week of October, Erdogan said nothing. He was almost silent. And with the killing that started against the Palestinians, he remained silent. He was outspoken only in the last few weeks. But he did not cut relationship with Israel as Bolivia did. He did only recall the ambassador. There are a bit of exchange of rough discourse between him and Netanyahu, but the situation was much worse in 2010 during the flotilla and the attempt to support Gaza at that time. Now, the reason why Erdogan remained silent for quite a while is because during the last elections, Erdogan understood that he was almost losing the election and the presidency. And due to his foreign policy, where he was in bad terms with everybody, with the Arab world, with the Israelis, with the Russian, yes and no, with NATO, yes and no, with the Americans, angry, and yet they want him in. So the Americans were supporting the coup d'etat against Erdogan, but then they put sanctions because of the S-400 missiles, the Russian S-400 missile, but then they need him because of Ukraine grain deal, and then they need him to accept Sweden and Norway in the in NATO. So all that mix of foreign policy, where Erdogan was standing everywhere and nowhere, he understood that his best policy is to recover good relationship with everybody. This is why he started with the Arab countries, because he had bad relationship with Egypt and Saudi Arabia and the Emirates, and he tried to mend this relationship, because also during the Khashoggi's killing of the journalist, Erdogan was very strongly against Saudi Arabia and showing all the intelligence information that the Turkish intelligence information held from inside the embassy and proved to be listening to everything that was happening in the embassy. So he wanted to incriminate Mohammed bin Salman, and the relationship remained very volatile. Because of that, because of the result of the election, because his economy was in a bad state, he wanted to recover some of the economy, particularly when the inflation was hitting him extremely hard. And the Turkish lira was losing to the dollar. For that, the relationship with Israel and the Arab states, or the other Arab states, believe, well, that was before the 7th of October, that Israel is the strongest army in the Middle East. It turned out to be extremely vulnerable, and that the relationship with Israel is the key to maintain a good relationship with the Americans. For that, he regained the relationship with the Israelis and lifted to a much better level before the 7th of October. And he remained as such until after the 15th of October. Now, Erdogan has a big part of the supporters who are in Syria, and are called the Syrian oppositions and the Syrian jihadis and all the other Islamist group in Idlib and in the north west of Syria. And because of that, his position as the leader, a secondary leader of the Arab world that he wanted to become as such, made him in a very embarrassing situation, particularly when Hamas is said to be a Muslim Brotherhood, and he is also a Muslim Brotherhood along with other countries in the Middle East, like Qatar, for example. So because of that, he feels some duty to support Hamas. But even though in the first couple of weeks he didn't, until he understood that this is going a bit far and his silence is going to cost him even further, now he stepped in. But still, he did not take any serious step to force or to threaten the Americans. I will never accept Sweden as part of NATO if you don't stop the war now. I will allow the Russian to do this and that in the Black Sea if you don't. He didn't threaten the Americans to squeeze them or to twist their arm to stop the war in Gaza. Every single leader in the Middle East has something to use to put pressure on the Americans and didn't do that. Even Egypt, even the Saudis, the Emiratis, the Bahrainis, they have the biggest military base in Bahrain. Everybody has something, but they choose not to because they really want to get rid of Hamas.
And we're going to go back there. Now we're here. It's Syria time. So President Assad has not issued any statement at all, I don't believe. The last time that a statement even came from his office was 17 October. We know that Golan Heights have been repeatedly attacked. Also with Hezbollah launching rockets there to hit the IOF. And then IDF in the beginning, not so much anymore, but they repeatedly hit Damascus and the Aleppo airports, shutting them down for periods of time. We understand that the Syria is spread completely thin, but to have I know, and we know Assad is a very quiet and pragmatic leader, but I was hoping that with this recent forays with China and Russia, that he would be more outspoken, and he's just not really said anything other than showing his sympathy and condemning Israel. And he didn't condemn Hamas in his statement. But we do know that Hamas and the Syrian Arab Army didn't really get along, but they've normalized those relations since then. Why do you think that Assad is so quiet, and what do you think that his silence means, if anything?
It's a difficult question you're putting me here. So there are many points to share with you today. First of all, Hamas was not in a good term with Assad only. They participated to overthrow Assad, and they were active in fighting within the Takfiri group, within the Al-Qaeda group, and within the Syrian opposition groups. So with all the groups, with the pro-Turkey groups, the Palestinians were there. And Khalid Mishal, the former representative of Hamas outside Gaza, was one of the main reasons that brought Hamas into a disastrous relationship with all the Arab countries that were supporting the Palestinian cause. Now, this relationship, following the intervention of Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah of Hezbollah, he managed to convince Assad to receive the Hamas delegation. And he did. It doesn't mean the Syrian population forgot about what Hamas did. However, in the Syrian mentality, the support of the Palestinian cause is there, because this is what Syria was about. It was one of the first countries who fought against Israel in 1973 to recover the Palestinian territory, and has lost the Golan Heights. Now, that's one aspect. The second aspect is the Russians, who are not ready to start another war with Israel, or at least to support a Syrian war against Israel. The Russian-Israeli relationship are very good, even if Israel supported Ukraine in the war against Russia, sent some intelligence services, sent drones and electronic material, and shared some experience. Still, there are many Russians in Israel and many Jews in Russia who have some power. And the last point I want to say is, from the Syrian philosophy and understanding of the military situation, Israel is capable, with its air force, to go and destroy all the military line of the Syrian army along the defensive line in Deir ez-Zor in the northeast, and in Idlib in the northwest. And what will happen is it will open a road for the Kurds to advance in Deir ez-Zor, and for the jihadists and Al-Qaeda to break in Idlib and go toward the north of Aleppo. Because Assad doesn't have the possibility today to open a front against the Israeli, according to his understanding, although the Iranians have another point of view that is completely different. At the end of the day, fighting against Israel would require a large destruction in your country, even if you can impose deterrence on the Israelis, because if you inflict damage on Israel, they will stop and they will understand that there is a balance of power. This is not something that Assad is ready to do today, because of his economy, because of the crippling sanction on his country, because Iran brings 1 tanker of oil per month, and he doesn't receive a lot of support from any other country, but a bit from Russia and a bit from Iran. And because he needs to look after what there is to maintain the country still united within the area that is under his control, where there is a large concentration of population. Already, the European and the Americans are imposing very harsh sanctions on Syria. They are stealing the food basket in the northeast. They're stealing the gas and oil. These are not my words. These are Donald Trump's words. He said, I want the oil. I'm taking the oil. And Joe Biden just followed exactly the policy of Donald Trump. So because of all these reasons together, he is allowing a certain flexibility, because the Golan Heights and the Sheba Farm meet at a certain point where there is a disputed area between Lebanon and Syria, to whom this area belongs to. So if Hezbollah fires from an area that is considered by the Israelis as a Syrian-occupied Golan Heights, then they blame the Syrian and they bomb the Syrian. But from Hezbollah's point of view, it belongs to Lebanon, and therefore it is legitimate to bomb the Israelis from there. And the last point is about the Israeli bombing of the airports. The Israelis have a very good intelligence services. every time there is a plane that is landing, one of these, for example, when the Iranian Foreign Minister Amir Abdullahian came to Syria, before the landing, the Israeli bombed the Damascus airport. So the plane was forced to go to Aleppo. And within minutes, they bombed the Aleppo airport. So the plane was forced to land in Beirut, and then he traveled by land to Beirut. Sometimes when there are military hardware that comes to Syria via the Syrian airport, or where there are key personality within the military advisors, the Iranian military advisors, who come to Syria, sometimes the Israelis bomb the airport and or prevent the Syrians from opening the door of the plane and force them to push the plane to return if this or that person comes off the plane. And the Israelis are very good in calling. They have access to the phone numbers of officers, and we're talking about high-ranking officers, as they do in with Gaza in the West Bank. They do also in Syria, and they say, according to the manifest that we have a copy of, because when a plane leaves to a destination, the manifest of the passengers is sent, and on the way, everything in the air can be received by all the intelligence services. So they identify certain personality and they prevent them from coming off the plane. But the alternative is easy. This or that person or whatever supply is going to Syria, it goes from Iran to Iraq and then into Syria, and it arrives always to Syria, regardless of the Israeli measures. And the Israelis acknowledge that every 5 shipments, we bomb 1. So there are 4 that arrives. However, it is not the time for the Syrian government to wage war on Israel according to the wish of President Assad.
So we've kind of unpacked everything except for Iran. So I have a question based on Iran here, and then we'll slowly start wrapping. We know that obviously Iran's been, engaged in diplomatic efforts to stop these attacks on Gaza. We know that also they essentially said, if this does not stop, if it's particularly the harm to children and innocent civilians, that there's a high likelihood that they would need to respond if these strikes persist. So I'd love to hear a little bit about Iran's position on all of this and essentially what drives their participation in the conflict and their strategies, how they essentially impact the broader Middle East.
So the Iranians are extremely careful in the word they choose. They never said, we will need to respond. They said the axis of the resistance will have to respond. This is from the Iranian point of view and language. It is something that they assume it can happen, and it may not happen. So what the Iranians have done throughout the decades is they have applied their constitution. And in their constitution, Article 150, they are obliged to support all the oppressed people of the world, regardless their religion. So what they do is there is a population, like in Venezuela, who is in need of support and ask Iran for help. So the Iranians went to Venezuela and supported the Venezuelan people, by restoring their refineries, by helping them to regain the extraction of oil. In Lebanon, there are people who want to fight against Israel, who are called Iranian proxies, and there's a very wrong terminology, but it is something that adopted by all the lightly informed Western academic. So they support Hezbollah. If Syria wants to fight and keep the state united and want to fight against the jihadists, then they support Syria. It doesn't mean Assad is Iranian proxy, because Assad disagrees with Iran on many issues, disagrees with Russia on many issues, and at the end of the day, he's doing what he believes it is in his interest. Because had Syria been an Iranian proxy, the missile would have been falling on Israel since a very long time. But because of that, the Palestinian in Gaza said several times, the Palestinian resistance, the Iranians are supporting us and never ask us anything. In fact, Iran disagree with any deal with the Israelis, however, agree with the Palestinians if the Palestinians accept to live in a two-state with the Israelis. The problem is that the Israelis don't want the Palestinians to live with them in a second state. So because of that, Iran is supporting the axis of the resistance. Iran is sending money, sharing equipment and weapons to all those who want to fight for their cause. And because of that, Iran has an area of influence without dictating its policy that sometimes doesn't meet with the policy of the locals, like in Iraq, like in Syria, and like in Israel. So that's very obvious. And so far, Iran has been very active diplomatically, trying to convince the Arab that they can do something. But Iran is the second most sanctioned country in the world after Russia. Used to be the first, but then Russia went with a double sanction. Used to be 3,500 sanctions on Iran. Now there are over 6,500 on Russia.
Congratulations to Russia.
So, yes, go ahead.
Then we have to ask, since you mentioned Russia, so we've talked about that for a year and a half. I've always looked at the Russia-Ukraine conflict as one battle or one stage in the World War III, the battle between unipolarity and multipolarity, and then seeing those uprisings in Africa as another kind of facet or front, and now Israel and Palestine. I think I see it all as like kind of an interconnectedness. I'm wondering if you see it that way. Also, with Ukraine and Russia still ongoing, how does this contribute to that? How long does this last? Does this lead into another front with China, Taiwan? Like, where are we going? Because everything's still in flux, and I just don't believe that the Israel-Palestine thing is the beginning or the end-all, be-all. There's so many more things that are moving at this point.
Everything is connected, and nothing is separate. And I'll explain that. First of all, the story started in 2015 and not in 2022. In 2015, Russia was convinced that the Americans are doing their best to dislodge Russia from its naval base in Tartus, Syria. The Russians went in Syria to support the Assad government for one objective, is to tell the Americans, let us work together. Stop this war. You're not going to achieve this objective, and the alternative is for the jihadis, the Islamic State and Al-Qaeda, to occupy this area. You're not going to be able to contain it because you've done this mistake before in Afghanistan. And Hillary Clinton came out and said, the Al-Qaeda and the Takfiri we are fighting today are the same people we have funded. So things will go out of control, and then we start from the beginning to fight these people that you are supporting today. The Americans thought that it is possible to make a deal with the Russians, and that was at the time of Secretary of State John Kerry, but then the Pentagon refused and considered that dealing with Russia is taboo, and they went out for Russia. Now, what happened later on is the second front is Ukraine. And what happened in Ukraine changed the whole world. In which way? We don't have multipolarity yet. We can't live in this illusion, but we can't even pretend to have multipolarity after the first or the second or the third year of challenging the unipolarity. The Americans, after Second World War, it took them from 1945 to 1982, when the perestroika dismantled the Soviet Union, to control the whole world until 2015, when the first time Russia rose and stood up to defend its interest. In 2011, Russia, at the time of Medvedev, failed to stop the Americans from invading and attacking Libya. So everything started in 2015. Because of the attack on Russia, where 50 nations, according to the Americans' information, gathered in Ramstein to attack Russia, defeat Russia, cripple the Russian economy, divide Russia into so many mini states, and they have failed. Because of that, we are observing a very big change in the world, where, first of all, I was disconnected by the information that Israel cut Gaza in two. Well, that was a few days ago, not now.
They keep saying it over and over again. So they've said it again today. So, the misinformation with Israel is just.
Yeah. So because of that, we have seen a major shift in countries like Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, saying we want to deal with China with the yuan. We want to sell oil to China, and we want to exchange with local currency. We want to be part of the BRICS. They started to refuse to increase the oil production that Joe Biden wanted, an increase of 1 million barrels per day. Russia said, let us decrease of 1 million barrels per day. Saudi Arabia said no to both, and they decreased of 2 million barrels per day. So we've seen the OPEC country looking after their own interest, but not the American interest in that particular case. But we cannot generalize. We've seen how India, one of the closest allies of the United States, joining effort with Russia and China, refusing the sanctions on Russia. We've seen Africa, how is kicking out France, how is joining the Russian in a meeting in St. Petersburg with 49 countries, meeting with President Putin, who explained to them what's happening and who received them and expressed his readiness to support them. We've seen how China is so active in Africa, and the Americans say we cannot defeat the Chinese there. How Latin America is turning the page and standing for its own interest, not necessarily against the United States, but also with Russia. So all that shift, including Gaza reaction today, is because the Americans are no longer a viable partner for everything, for peace, for partnership, for commerce. They are the bully of the world, distributing sanctions left, right, and center, luckily forcing the countries to look for alternatives of the SWIFT, alternatives of the dollar, alternative of commerce and trade in local currencies, and in the yuan or in other currency, and the fall of Europe. That is a major event. And all that because Russia did not fall in Ukraine. Had Russia fell in Ukraine, we would have seen another 50 years of a US occupation with the European ally and the total colonialism again of the whole world. Today, we observe the total decline of the European economy, total decline of the European influence in Africa and in the Middle East. They're almost non-existing. We see the rising of countries in Africa, in the Middle East, in Latin America, in Asia, and all of that because Russia managed not to lose. That's it. And now today, we see a hesitant China. Although they have managed to break the ice between Iran and Saudi Arabia, but still they need a more active role. That is the wishful thinking of the Middle Easterns. But it doesn't mean this is what China is ready to do so, because China is still maintaining excellent relationship with the Americans because they both need one another. And they both still dealing with one another, notwithstanding all the sanctions that America, over 550 sanctions on China, is imposing on China. So we see the Chinese pragmatic. They work on 100-year plan. They very patient in working on taking things gradually, entering into continent in a different way. They are well established with the Russian now, with the Russian gas line that comes from Mongolia, with many sources of energy that come from Iran, from Saudi Arabia, from the Emirates, from different sources, from Azerbaijan, from Venezuela. So all that, China is making sure that economically is strong. And then it turned out to look at this war as at this military as the war is happening tomorrow, and it's never going to happen at the same time. And because of that, China today is a very powerful country, and it is much more powerful because Russia was not defeated. What the Americans wanted to do to defeat Russia and to send a message to China, they failed, and they brought Russia and China closer together like they have never been. And that is the hope of humanity when Russia and China are offering a model that is not a warmongering model to the world as the Americans offered. And I can tell you, whatever the Chinese and the Russian model is going to be, is not going to be worse than the Americans, because we've seen the worst in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Libya, in Syria, in Palestine, how they deal with double standards, the ultimate hypocrisy. If at the beginning of the war in Ukraine, Ursula von der Leyen said, if Putin cuts the water or electricity, that will be a war crime and we will persecute him. And then this is what exactly Benjamin Netanyahu is doing with the Palestinians. And then Ursula von der Leyen goes and speaks illegally in the name of the EU, and she doesn't represent the EU foreign policy, and say the EU is with you. France exactly did the same. Germany did the same. But these people don't count anymore. So just this double standard and hypocrisy, it's thanks to the internet, is much more obvious today. And people can no longer be fooled about the lack of value that we have here in Europe. And we pretend that we are countries of law, that we respect the law, that we have a certain value we would like to keep. It turned out that I can go to President Emmanuel Macron in the street, insult him in his face, and he will tell me, okay, let us have a dialogue. But if I say Israel is killing children, I go to the police and I am interrogated. We are living in a dictatorship. We've lost everything.
It's a complete dystopia. I mean, I saw Abby Martin go up to her senator's office just the other day, and 10 cops showed up, within 20 minutes and told her she was going to get arrested if she stays on the premises. I mean, getting worse and worse. And I think what it comes down to, I saw this short interview clip of Biden in 1986 saying, well, this is the best investment we made into Israel, this $3 billion US, right? If there weren't an Israel, the US would have to invent in Israel to protect her interests in the region. So I think even if this conflict were to miraculously come to an end at some point in our lifetimes, the US will always, be a huge factor in the destabilization, essentially, of the Middle East. So yeah, it's tragic to watch it unfold. And of course, also, the propaganda, the censorship. We know there's a full communications blackout again. It feels like people are kind of getting desensitized to the violence, kind of shutting off. Do you think this is something that is almost intentional in a way? Desensitize people enough on a conflict, and then maybe they'll just look the other way and not care enough to that they'll just normalize that kids are getting blown up in Gaza every day, schools and refugee camps are getting bombed. What are your thoughts on that?
I can speak for myself. So when you are in front of so many atrocity and see people killed, and then you have children coming up to you when you are on the scene, when a bomb just landed on a house, killing everybody at the exception of a child or a little girl, and she asks you, what have I done? I don't understand why my parents have been killed. They've done nothing. What you have to do is, first of all, is something that will affect you all your life, and that is called PTSD. And secondly, you need at a certain moment to shut down to be able to survive and switch into a survival mode where you are not affected by your surrounding. And the only thing that creates a balance in you is to be able to channel what you see to other people, so you share with them your experience. And when you share with other people your experience, you distribute in a way with your article the same responsibility and the same feeling and the same weight of what you have seen to other people. To a certain point, when you think you have become numb, and I've seen many of my colleagues throwing the camera in the middle of the street, going to an airport that is bombarded and closed and where there is no plane, and thinking they just want to flee and leave, but they go nowhere, and then return the second day with a little bit more calmer because they have no way out and they need to continue doing their job. So being confronted to so much atrocity, it gives you the wrong feeling of being numb, but you're not. In your head is working all the time. You always see these images. You live with these images, and the sense of injustice is overwhelming. So when you hear people like Joe Biden or Secretary of State Antony Blinken coming to Israel and say, I am coming as a Jew, you say, what is this? I mean, he's speaking, who said that this is a religious war? Mm-hmm. It is a war for the injustice that these people are suffering from. We have seen in our business so much injustice in the world, so much killing, indiscriminated killing, that people just brush like Tony Blair. Oh, I've killed 1 million Iraqi and it was a mistake and I'm sorry. And he gets away with it. Now, you can't be more unjust to allow people like Tony Blair or like George Bush to say, oh, we made a mistake on weapons of mass destruction. We went and invade the country and we destroyed it and it's still not recovering. We killed 1 million Iraqi and okay, well, we turned the page. I mean, who told you that the Iraqis are turning the page? Who told you that the Iraqis are not suffering? I'm saying that because I lived 9 years in Iraq. In Afghanistan, you bombed the hell out of Afghanistan for 20 years to give back the power to the same Taliban. So all that make us as journalists and war correspondents, we are human beings after all. But we see so much injustice that you have two choices. Either you create your own blog and you work as an independent, and then you speak your mind. And you can be sure that nobody is going to hire you again. Or you go with the flow and you write what the editor wants, and then you oppress even more all your feeling. Because do you think people in the CNN, BBC, Fox News, all the news, Reuters, AFP, AP, UPI, they are not human beings? They don't see what's happening? Everybody sees what's happening. We all understand that among colleagues when we start talking. But then when you write It depends who is controlling you. If you are free, you get hardly money to pay your bills. If you're not free, then you get a good salary and you are looked after because you are part of the club. It's a very difficult choice that I prefer to suffer myself and to be able to sleep, and I need only 2 minutes to fall asleep, or to have a lot of money and not being able to sleep and say, where is my conscience, at least in front of the people that I have seen suffering? And all the diplomats who leave their jobs, they start talking because they really need it for themselves, not for the other. They need to be clean. They need to come clean with themselves. They need to say the reality, to say at least we have contributed after all this damn silence that we have been throughout the years and decades of our job. And what's happening in Gaza? Well, look what Obama said, who is responsible for killing so many people in Afghanistan. He said, the killing of the Palestinian cannot be ignored. Now, he's still not saying this is a massacre, because, you know, the Jewish lobby is so strong and the Zionists are so powerful that you risk really heavy consequences. But a person like me, I have the luck of accepting to live with minimum and then speak my mind. Well, it's not easy.
I have a huge amount of respect to you for that, by the way. Kind of why I left the mainstream journalism world as well. It's much more gratifying for one to be able to speak the truth and not feel oppressed by some editor in the newsroom.
Well, Yara and I have both lost our jobs due to our political views. So please like, subscribe, donate, share, do all of those things, because now we're free, but we're also very poor. So please help us. Please help the independent journalists. But yes, Elijah, thank you so much for giving us so much of your time. And I'm gonna message you again in December and say, are you ready for another episode? But thank you for being a regular guest. Would you like to tell our listeners where they can find you?
Well, I have a blog, and they just type my name and they can subscribe. That will be very helpful. And I have my account on Twitter where I say really what I want to say. No.
I think we're all saying what we want to say on Twitter now. Thank you, everyone. Please like, subscribe, and share to us and Elijah. We will be back on Tuesday with Kevork Almassian, sometime this week with Scott Ritter, and sometimes this week with Pepe Escobar, whenever he decides to show up. So thanks again, Elijah. Thank you, Yara, as always, and we'll see you guys next time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you again.